she started giving me art lessons when I was a toddler. But I started out with a real advantage. Like by the time starting school, I don't know if I had any real ability or not, but I had training. Right. So like I come into kindergarten and I'm like several years ahead basically compared to other children as far as being able to depict something and draw it realistically.
Welcome to Overeducated and Underemployed. Got a really interesting episode this week. We've got Manda McKay, who is a veterinary illustrator, as well as an artist and a YouTuber with videos on artistic inspiration and creativity, kind of motivation. And she's also recently started a series, a feminist field guide series that I think is really interesting, and I encourage you to check it out. There's a link in the description. I don't know that I'd ever even heard of a veterinary illustrator before. This was a really fascinating conversation about that, as well as about Manda's life and influences and all of the things. She's also an artist independently of that and has a new book called Artistic Alchemy. It came out late last year. There's a link to it in the description. She's also part of the 13 Collective, which a bunch of the guests on this podcast have been a part of. It's an art collective out of Athens, Georgia. I plan to talk to more of them as well over the next few months. Anyway, really fascinating, interesting conversation. Really appreciated her coming on the show. Yeah. Before I get into that, I just want to remind y'all this Friday, the Rec Room, me and Sean Lubin are co-headlining a comedy show along with a few other comedians, Caleb Thomas, Carol Hatcher, and Laurent Josie Jr. It's going to be a hilarious night, I promise. Come check it out. Sean and I are going to record an episode of this podcast as well, so look forward to that. And then in a few weeks at the Phipps Farm in Tallahassee, make sure y'all come out to P-Funk Fest, take it to the stage. It's going to be killer. We're going to be talking to all kinds of members of the Parliament Funkadelic family and doing some live broadcasts and all kinds of cool stuff. So make sure you hit the subscribe button because next week we've got Thelma and the Sleaze on the show, and that was a really cool interview too. Make sure you come check out that fest. It's going to be killer. Here's my interview with Manda McKay. Just be aware that we do get into some medical stuff at a couple points here. If you're a little bit squeamish, when she starts talking about that, you may just want to skip forward a couple of minutes. It was really awesome talking to her. We're on Overeducated and Underemployed. I'm here with Manda McKay. She's a visual artist, and she just launched a YouTube channel with like tips for creativity, and it's really inspiring. I've watched several of your videos already, but I'm going to start with the first question that I ask everybody that comes on, and I'm just making sure my mic's on. And I think it's just a question that kind of gets to the root of early artistic influence, but what's the first song that you remember loving as a kid?
The first song? That might be California Dreaming by the Mamas and the Papas.
Mamas and the Papas, yeah.
That was, my uncle had the record, and then he had gone off to Vietnam, and so like at some point my sister and I had it when we were babies. So I think California Dreamin' would be the first one that I remember like that.
What about that song do you remember loving about it?
We were in California at the time,
okay.
So it did make me relate to that. Let me think about that. What did I love about it? It's got a really interesting story in the song, and even when I was a toddler, where the singer pretends that he's praying and he's just trying to get out of the cold going into a church, and he's just faking it basically. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why this would appeal to me when I was that age, but I still really love the song now.
Yeah. Do you remember how old you were? You said you were
probably 2 years old, maybe.
Oh, wow, okay.
So, yeah.
And did you have an early affinity for music?
I did as far as listening to it, but not as far as having any musical talent.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, I can relate to that. I'm the same way. I'm not like I can sing enough to do 3 karaoke songs, and my voice is just gone. But other than that, I've had no musical talent, but I've always been super passionate about music and loved it a lot. Do you remember an offshoot of that question that I ask everybody? Do you remember some of the like early visual art that you really loved as a kid?
Salvador Dali definitely would be one of the first ones. Really, my
Yeah,
parents have some limited edition lithographs. They were like signed lithographs.
I have a friend who has one. I think it's like a pencil sketch, and they have it in their guest house. So when people come to stay,
They better trust those guests.
Oh,
not to take that.
definitely.
But yeah, this one had like a weird head with a tongue sticking out, and a daisy with eggs, like cooked eggs, and they were dripping off of it.
Oh.
But yeah, I think it's actually from a Don Quixote series.
Okay.
But so we have this whole collection, and then a few years ago I found some paperwork from where they had bought it from a gallery in South Carolina, and it was like basically saying, oh, we'll buy them back at $500 each if you decide you don't like them. But I think they're worth more than that now, but it's just funny. It's, yes, 500, here, give me my 500. So I think they're worth a little bit more than that now.
Probably. Yeah. Have you ever made it to the Dali Museum down in St. Petersburg?
I have not. At one point, my husband Chris and I were talking about doing that, but I don't know.
It is definitely
We
worth
haven't
the
traveled
trip.
in a while, put it that way.
It is definitely worth the trip if you're ever able to make it. It's not only is it a really cool collection, but the way they put it all in a new building probably about 15 years ago now. But the building is really beautiful. You can see pictures of the outside of the building, but also the way that they've hung the paintings and the way you're able to view them. Like the Abraham Lincoln, the famous Abraham Lincoln one, the first time you see it up close, if you follow like the correct kind of path, and then like later you turn a corner and you're all the way across like the entire museum from it. And so you get to see both perspectives like he intended. And so that's just like one example. It's a really well done museum.
I would definitely love to check it out. And then there's one in Spain also.
Oh, is there? Okay.
That a friend of my mom's went to years ago, and she brought me back a postcard from it, so that was cool. I still have the postcard.
Is that, I'm guessing, a love that's continued, it sounds like, into your later life?
Yeah, years ago they had a really cool exhibit at the High Museum
Yeah.
with all sorts of artwork that I hadn't seen before. The Dali exhibit, apparently, I guess it was Mondrian that Dali just hated, or at least pretended to hate. And there
wow.
was like a short film of him basically dissing Mondrian. He's one who, he's famous for doing like basically squares. So almost the opposite of Dali with his super realism that he was working in.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was dissing Mondrian, and you always have to wonder if it was like just for show or if he really felt that way, but he did seem like he felt that way. But I thought that was a funny thing to include in the exhibits.
So did you start painting or drawing or anything like that at a young age?
Yes, very much. Don't even remember really when I started, but my mom had at one point been an art major in college, and then I guess she switched to being an English major. But so she still had a lot of artistic talent, and so she started giving me art lessons when I was a toddler.
Oh,
So
cool.
this definitely, and I've talked about this in a few of my creativity tip videos, but I started out with a real advantage. Like by the time starting school, I don't know if I had any real ability or not, but I had training.
Right.
So like I come into kindergarten and I'm like several years ahead basically compared to other children as far as being able to depict something and draw it realistically. So yeah, I definitely had an advantage with mom's training me because she knew what she was doing with that.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm guessing also like the materials were always around too.
I didn't do oil paints. I work in oil painting now, and she actually still had her art supplies from college. And in fact, they're still in the house, I think. I did wind up taking some of the oil paints at one point, but I never worked in oils when I was a child, mostly because of the solvents. But so we had all sorts of watercolors and colored pencils and graphite, but watercolor was what I would use for painting. And we had a whole, in the house, a utility room that was basically a laundry room, but it had, for my sister and for me, we each had an area to sit and like counter space to just work on art.
So one thing I've always been curious about when it comes to painting in particular is when it comes to the act of painting. I understand like how they look differently, but how do the different types of paint differently as a painter?
That's a really great question. They are completely different because oil paints you can blend really well, and then if you're not using a medium to make it dry faster, which I don't because it's super toxic, like it'll
What does that
stay wet.
I'm sorry, what does that mean?
A solvent?
Medium.
Or a medium?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So
I'm so sorry.
Hey, at least it wasn't me. I thought I was going to be the one doing that. There are different things that you can add to oil paints to make them either dry faster or dry slower, whatever it is that you want. But it takes a while. In a painting session, nothing's going to be dry. So I can keep blending and mixing stuff. Whereas I tried a few paintings in acrylics, and I even did a signboard. I got a grant from Oconee Cultural Arts Foundation, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, to do an outdoor signboard, and to do it in time, it had to be in acrylics. And I was asking an old friend of mine who did murals like for advice, but it was frustrating with the acrylics because it dries right away, so it's hard to blend, but then it's not completely dry, so then you're like going back over it and it's lifting it up. And I'm like, how does anybody work with this? Because I had done like one or two when I was like out of school, and I used to airbrush. I used to do pet portraits using airbrushed watercolor on top of colored pencil.
Oh, interesting.
And
I don't think I've ever heard of that.
I don't do that anymore, but yeah, just some things I learned in school. So should I talk about, since this is Overeducated, should I talk about my education?
The origin of the name, first of all, I think it's commentary on the state of a lot of artists in general.
Oh, I agree with
but
that.
It's also a place I've always been stuck in, but I found myself in between a rock and a hard place where I was like overqualified for a lot of positions and underqualified for a lot of positions. And I always felt like that. And then Lee Baines III put out a song called Centerville, line in it called, that says, we're overeducated and we're underemployed. And so he let me use that as the title because it's something that I always related to. Gotcha. Yeah, no, I think honestly, like one of the things that's always fascinated me, especially as a historian too, is kind of like the chemistry of art, because that goes into the restoration, the preservation, and that sort of thing of older art pieces. But also just like sheer curiosity about what paint does and how.
I try to use stuff that isn't extremely toxic. I definitely don't use turpentine, but I think it was watercolorists that now see, I'm not an art historian, so forgive me anybody if I'm giving the dates wrong, but I think it was basically like late 19th century, maybe mid to late 19th century, but there were like all these different artists would get all sorts of ailments from the watercolors they were using, but then there was even like I think a color that was used in wallpaper that was popular at the time, and it would mold or something and release, I don't know, there were fumes, there was arsenic and something, maybe the green, I don't know.
One thing I've heard a lot about is like old Disney artists that were doing like the backgrounds for the animated movies and doing like
spray for the background.
You would definitely want to wear a particle mask.
And a lot of the times they were not provided with that protection back then. And so a lot of them were getting lung cancer and
I will say this
things like
though,
that.
I definitely don't dispute that, but I will say this, that there were these special desks made for Disney animators, and one of the features was that it had a place for them to put down their cigarette. And I mean, we're talking like the 30s.
Right, exactly.
And then also they actually had a little drawer that was made for holding alcohol.
How are they gonna drink their alcohol and smoke their cigarettes? They've got that pesky protective equipment on.
Exactly. But no, when I would airbrush watercolors on top of color pencil, yes, in class, and then of course at home, we were always required to wear just like a particle mask, not a super
like your respirator.
Not like you're going into a chemical warfare or anything, but.
Although
but
that might be a cool
that,
picture, just you in front of me spraying, especially in these times.
I know, yeah. But yeah, I haven't airbrushed in a long time at this point.
You were painting, drawing from the get-go. How did you find your voice? I don't know what the right word for it would be with visual art.
Voice.
Is that right? Okay.
Because it's, as far as in the art world with the capital A,
right.
They like to be able to see a painting or whatever and recognize what artist did it.
Right.
Like having a bunch of, like a real variety of styles isn't necessarily considered a good thing in the art world with the capital A, which I can't call myself an outsider artist, but obviously I don't have a huge gallery representation, and I'm not in museums or anything, and that's not really like the track that I'm going on.
It doesn't usually happen until
after you're dead.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. I'm so glad you finished it for me, because I was like, how morbid can we get here?
Yeah. If you've looked at some of my artwork, some of it can be really morbid, but
yeah, I'm excited. We're gonna get into that for sure, and that's part of what your voice. You would say your voice is that there is like a darkness to some of your art.
A lot of the voice does come from the school that I have, because I was a medical illustrator. My very first job was as a veterinary illustrator at the Auburn University Vet School. But so I have a master's degree in medical illustration, and that was at the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta. Now it's Augusta University, or part of Augusta University. There was the cadaver lab. And so there were 8 of us in my class, although one dropped out after the first medical exam, the first gross anatomy exam. No.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had cadaver lab, and there were like 50. It was with the med students that were on the track to be doctors, and there were 50. There were 200 students that were taking gross anatomy. So there were 50 cadavers. Wait, am I doing the math right? Something like that. Yeah. There were 2 rooms full of cadavers.
You're an artist, not a mathematician.
Yeah. I draw pictures because I can't communicate verbally. So. Nobody ever knows that's a joke.
I think you're doing great.
That's a joke, and I say that to people from time to time, and not one person has ever been like, so, I guess that's true. I can see that. So anyway, what was I saying? But yeah, so we had all these cadavers in the lab and 2 dissection teams. So we had 4, we would alternate days. So there were 4, med students that would dissect the cadaver one day, and then 4 medical illustrators came in it was alternating, and we each had our cadaver, where it was just so you're on the same cadaver, and ours didn't have a stomach. He had been a pest control man, and he died at 48 from cancer.
Wow.
Probably related to all the poison that he was spraying. If you want to talk about not having tools to help keep you safe.
Did you form a sort of personal connection with the cadaver? Working with the same one over time? I feel like you have to in some way, in a weird way.
It was like our cadaver, and he had almost no fat on him.
Did you know his name? And I'm not asking you to share it.
They never post the name.
Okay. They tried to depersonalize. Like, I'm asking for
No,
that.
they didn't necessarily try to depersonalize. I think it was just for privacy, but they did at one
Gotcha.
point put up the details, which is how that I knew that he was 48 years old and had died. He'd been in pest control, and that he had stomach cancer, but he had no stomach, and a few of his anatomical structures were fused together, and he had no fat on him. Because most cadavers, if you die normally, you're going to have like some body fat, and you're having to like clean it out, like to get to the structures. And our poor dude, he had no fat on him.
So, can we back up for a minute?
Okay, yeah. We'll take it off of the cadaver, because people are probably not expecting it to get
Yeah. But I mean, we can. You're fine. But I'm actually really curious about what kind of led you. First of all, I didn't even know that it's obvious that it has to, but I didn't even think about the fact that medical artists were like that you go to school for that, right?
Yeah, there's two schools of thought, I think, as far as if you're trying to do realistic art. And one is that if you just draw or paint or whatever, exactly it's going to come out looking accurate, looking like you want it to look. And then the other school of thought, which obviously would apply to medical illustration, is that you really should have an understanding of what it is that you're drawing or painting. I probably lean, obviously, from my schooling, lean towards the understanding the anatomy.
Right.
But
no, I think that's like fascinating and great. And also, like, I'm thinking about like people who paint horses, right?
I used to paint horses.
And so I think understanding the anatomy of a horse is super important, because like otherwise like my muscles look weird, and there's all these like things that just like you get into that uncanny valley kind of thing where it looks almost like a horse but not quite. But what I really want to get into though is like what led to the decision to go to school to be a medical illustrator, because I think this is like a unique thing, and I'm not sure like how much of your voice was shaped by your schooling and how much your voice led to your schooling.
It was definitely a little from column A, a little from column B. My dad was a surgeon. He was a urologist with a private practice, but he discouraged me and my sister from ever wanting to be doctors, because it's like you really do have to be available 24/7. And we lived like 5 minutes from the hospital. Even on Saturdays and Sundays, he would have to go in. He'd drive into the hospital and make his rounds and see his patients. And if he wanted to take off time to travel somewhere, obviously you take a financial hit, because he would have to stop doing any surgical procedures for maybe a couple weeks leading up to, in case somebody had a problem. He didn't want to be out of town and then a patient have a problem, because we lived in a small town, so he was the only urologist there. But I had an interest in medical stuff, and like coming from a scientific family, and my parents were from Chicago. My dad was from the south side of Chicago, and he was in the Army, and we moved around, and we wound up in South Carolina, and in a very small town in South Carolina in the middle of the woods and swamp. And my parents loved it, and my dad especially loved it, and he got like really into nature. So I definitely had the parents like, okay, art and nature, and then medicine. So all of these things coming together. And one thing that I loved when I was little was I think the brand is the Golden Nature Field Guides. And to think, what kind of kid is into this? But this is actually inspiring what I'm working on for this year, a project that's probably going to take all year. But these field guides have like very realistic color paintings in them of different things. One of my favorites is the non-flowering plants with mushrooms and ferns and mosses. I was always really into mosses, and so it has like little paragraphs about how to identify each thing, and then a really nicely done color painting of everything. So that was always a part of my aesthetic. And then when I found out that scientific illustration existed, that was when I was in college, and I was just an art major, and like just drawing. I was in drawing and painting, and I ran into a girl at a concert at the Omni. It was the Rat concert, if you
Rat.
must know.
Yeah, no, I saw Rat once.
Which is embarrassing. But so I went to this concert, and I saw this girl that I recognized there, and then she actually lived on my dorm. And I talked to her afterwards, and she was like, "Oh, I'm in this program called Scientific Illustration." I was like, "What? What is this scientific illustration of which you speak?" And so it was combining science and art, basically. So we went to this concert, and it was the Omni, which held a lot of people. And I was surprised that I recognized this girl who I had seen in my dorm. But later on, we were talking about the concert, like the next week or something. And that's where she told me that her major was scientific illustration. And I was like, huh. And I also talk about underemployed. Like, I will say that I was like, okay, my parents will be happy to hear that, because that did sound like more of a track to a steady job.
Yeah.
Like where I could use, because I was like, oh wow, I can just draw and paint mosses or mushrooms or human bone or something. And
It
so
almost reminds me of like a morbid version of a police sketch artist.
I think the police sketch artist is more morbid, if you ask me, but because they're trying to like, and I don't know how do you do it. And you're like, okay, what did his nose look like? I imagine they must have these questions that they ask, and I've never had to like.
It's like a really fucked up version of Guess Who.
Yeah.
The card game.
I don't know. I remember what was the show? There was this show that was on, there were like 3 episodes of it, like Bakersfield PD, and they had the police sketch artist, and he'd be like, does this look familiar? And they'd be like, oh, Blue Eyes or something. And he was just like sketching celebrities. I don't know. But so I never did learn what the method is that they use for that. But I'm sure there's they must have some super duper training for that. But
So did you have like a morbid curiosity growing up aside from the medical interest, or was it pretty much strictly from your dad being a surgeon?
I think it was more just medical and scientific. I wasn't ever.
You're not into like horror movies.
Do you ever see these? Yeah. Do you ever see these things about creepy stuff that little kids say and like, how do I take your bones out and stuff like that to their parents when they're like 2 years old, and the parents are like, what? And this is precisely why I don't have children, because like I'm sure they would murder.
You're scared of them?
Yeah, they would murder me in my sleep if they could, I think. But
is there any stories like that about you? Is that what you're leading to?
I have a feeling that like my parents would have whitewashed this if there was something like that.
Yeah,
but
fair enough.
So yeah.
So at what point did you realize that and I'm still working back a little bit from you starting school, but at what point did you realize that like you wanted to be a professional artist? Was that always, or was there like a turning point as a kid?
Yeah, because it's like the knowing, not necessarily knowing about the professional part, but just knowing that I'm an artist in the same way that as a toddler that I knew that I was female. And I hope it's okay to say that, because I know some people are with it being on a spectrum.
Well, no, and I think, maybe not at toddlerhood, but I think a lot of people that have transitioned genders
probably by age 5.
Knew at a very young age.
Just kind of like
so I don't think that's an unfair analogy.
Yeah, like that there were like things that I knew about myself from like age 2 or 3, probably, and like that I knew I was female and I knew that I was an artist in the same way, which is like a really strong feeling that yes, I'm an artist. But at that point, I wasn't really thinking about being a professional, because I had Bank of Mom and Dad. And
were there other things that you, when you were a kid, like what do you want to be when you grow up, or anything like that?
I guess not. I may have at some point said doctor. And I will say every single person in the medical, all 8 of us that then turned to 7, in my medical illustration class, when we were in there taking gross anatomy, all of us had to face the question, should we be doctors instead? We would have had to reapply and all that.
Right.
Hadn't taken all the necessary classes, but like all of us were like,
really into it.
Should we be doctors? But yeah, I'm sorry, what was the question?
Well, I'm trying to figure out if you ever had a time where you wanted to be something else, or if
Olympic sprinter.
Okay.
I was very fast as a child. And
Yeah.
then I wound up with all sorts of issues with my feet and my
Oh,
knees and my
goodness.
hips,
Yeah.
where it just was not going to happen. But boy, I was like, up until puberty hit and I had all these weird things wrong with me, I was like so fast. So
Yeah.
that was the only other thing, was just be an Olympic sprinter.
So, but were you into the outdoors, or were you just into running?
And also, if I use the word survivalist, I think now it has like a different connotation. But
I don't know.
had
It might be
this-
starting to come back around to the left.
but like to be able to survive in the wilderness. And not that I've ever done this, but I remember when I was like 10 and 12 years old, I really wanted to do a thing called Outward Bound. Did they have that everywhere? You know what
I
that
know
is?
what it is.
They
I
just
don't know
like
if
send
they
you
have
out
it
with a
everywhere.
knife. Because I said that my dad was really into nature, so he
They
had
might not
all
know what it
these-
is, but it's
Okay, it
basically
was
just like a
basically-
survival check,
You
right?
had to, yeah, and I think you had to be at least 16 to do it, but they put you out in the woods with just a knife for a week, and you're supposed to survive, which really isn't, I don't know, theoretically you could go a week without any food at
I
all.
feel like that
but,
is probably child abuse in some states too.
Yeah. But no, like you may have had to be 18, I don't know. It was like at least 16, and I was not old enough to do it. And then I was off in college and didn't think about it anymore. But yeah, my dad held all these nature books, and so I haven't actually put them into practice, but I know different things like how to make a snare out of a sapling and different ways to like set a trap to take down a deer and things like that. But I've never actually used them, and I don't kill animals.
Have you ever
at this
incorporated
point.
any of that kind of stuff into your art?
No.
Like
I
the
mean,
survivalist type
No,
stuff?
because unless you count that I can forage for items in the woods that I then use in my paintings, but that's about the extent of it.
I mean,
So,
that's actually exactly what I meant, to be honest with you. Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, not like making a trap or anything. If I find bones or moth wings or something, they're just, the animal's already dead and it's right there on the forest floor, and then I just pick it up. So
That's pretty cool.
harvesting ethically. I'm not setting traps for them, but
No. And I was also wondering, I've seen some interesting art pieces that, I guess they were more like sculpture type things that incorporated, and they were usually more of a protest against like animal abuse, but it would
Yeah.
incorporate things like traps or anything like that.
I
Yeah,
have done some pieces about animal abuse. I did one piece that I really liked it was a cat skull that my mom found in the woods, and I'm going to be doing another painting with it fairly soon. And then an egg, somebody's pet chicken had laid an egg, and they let me use it, and it was like this, like a green, some of these types of chickens that aren't the kind where you find their eggs in the grocery stores, they have different colors. So it was called, or no, I called it Some Are More Equal, that's what I called it. But it was about the way that you have some animals that are considered pets and then others are considered food.
yeah.
And I
yeah.
guess the chicken kind of confuses the point nowadays, because it's like some people eat them, some people keep them as pets.
Some people will eat them in front of them,
Yeah, some people eat them and keep them as pets.
but
I
not
know
the
some
same
people-
ones.
Hopefully not. I hope not, because it's.
I just
their
don't
pet.
think, I don't think that the chickens that lay eggs are good eating. It's just, that's all.
I think they put them in a chicken soup when they're done laying
Yeah,
eggs.
there
But,
you go. There you go.
but so anyway, I have had some about animal abuse, but
I think like the industrial nature of our like farming practices is what has made like consuming meat like really hard to like ethically justify now, more than anything else. The survivalist type aspect of
I mean,
it
at
is
least
a
if you
is a
go
lot
out
different.
and,
Yeah.
like, put a snare and catch a rabbit, like it's
Right.
At least the rabbit lived its life. And
Yeah,
then, like,
yeah. And also it was dumb enough to get caught.
That's right.
It
That's
wasn't
on rabbit.
raised to be killed. Anyway, so when you're in school for medical illustration, what made you decide that you definitely weren't going to go and be a doctor instead? Was there any like point where you were like, no, I'm glad I'm here? Or was there anything that was like,
Just reminding myself that I just really like doing art, and then with my dad, he was always talking about like the extreme responsibility of having to be a doctor, and
well,
you know,
yeah, it's a
it's-
lot of pressure.
It is, and I think especially being a surgeon, and with him that you have to make these very fast decisions that may or may not kill somebody.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just was like, yeah, I can't see myself having that amount of responsibility and having to have somebody's life in my hands. Yeah.
What did you do after you finished college?
So college was here at UGA, and that was scientific illustration, although technically it was interdisciplinary studies.
Is
They
that
had
why
a
you
program
first?
for it. They had a program for it, but they didn't have it as like a degree, but they had classes, and they had all sorts of classes and everything, and that was where I learned to airbrush. And then I went to, 10 days after I graduated, started Medical College of Georgia, and that was for the master's degree program. And then I got a job before I graduated, but I didn't graduate, at, like I said, at the vet school at Auburn University. And that was extra fun because that was with animals.
Yeah. And that's where you were doing the horse illustrations? Or
I had been
it's
painting
before?
horses. We had horses when I was growing up, so I
Okay.
was painting horses for a long time. That was the main thing that I would tend to paint.
So that was like a thing you were like passionate about early
Yes.
on. Okay. Did you find it particularly, because I think horses historically in art, like it's something that people have talked about, and cats too, I think. Like cats have always looked a little bit off until they didn't.
No,
But there's like these animals, a couple of groups of animals that like artists historically really always
and
struggle with.
babies in the medieval, like the whole creepy, and like the baby Jesus, but he looks like he's 2 years old, but he's an infant. That whole, all that
Yeah.
weirdness. But yeah, horses. I think the main thing with horses, and occasionally you will find an artist that from back then. Have you ever seen a horse in your life? And you probably
Right.
have, because they were around a lot more. But no, there were plenty of artists, and like George Stubbs, I guess, was a really good one. And he did a great job with the horse, like painting horses, but they didn't understand the horse's gait. I'm still surprised that
okay.
because if you look at all of these old paintings, it's always, they have the horse running like a deer, and both hind feet are on the ground, and it's leaping or something. And I'm really
Right.
surprised that they didn't figure out that it's a little bit different than that. But that was how, again, I'm not an art historian, so hopefully I'm not just saying something that's completely incorrect. But as far as I understand it, that was the first movie made was.
Yeah,
I
this
think
is
it
also a
was
podcast, not a documentary, so
Oh, okay.
you're fine.
Okay. I think it was, I think it actually had to do with a vet that about how horses were actually galloping. So they had a racehorse, and they set up cameras, and it finally showed this is how a horse actually gallops, and it looks nothing like these artists have been doing. Side note, when I was painting horses as a kid and as a young adult, I was an expert on the gallop, the trot, the walk, and
Really
the
good of you.
legs. That was one of my strong things, where I would have considered myself an expert on that back then. Maybe not so much now, but so sorry, 18th century painters. Sorry, y'all dropped the ball. But.
So at what point did you start to find your voice? Was it in college? Was it before then? Was it
Honestly,
all of the above?
It wasn't until about 15, or wait, what year is it? Yeah, 15, it's been 15 years. I wasted quite a bit of time. I shouldn't say it's a waste, but I was trying to develop a technique that was like a style of art, because everybody always says that the most recent thing like that was Cubism. And what I mean by a style of art is that if you picture Cubism or Impressionism, for example, and you could look at a still life or a portrait or a landscape painted in a Cubist style or an Impressionist style, and you'd be like, hey, that's Impressionism. And it wasn't dependent on the subject matter. And I had come up with something that was promising, and I called it like a motion blur technique, but I kept trying to develop that. And I probably, I shouldn't say I wasted it, but like I spent several years like trying to work out something with that.
Do you
And
think
then
you feel like you not wasted, but you feel like you just maybe got hung up on the technicalities of some things a little bit too
Well,
often?
and then I realized it's like the art is about the message of the art, and it's not really about the technique used.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, forget it. I'm just going back to realism and worrying about the meaning of the piece, the message of the piece.
You made a video pretty recently about like constraint being a blessing.
Yes,
when it comes to
with
creativity.
limits.
Do you
Yes.
think that was a way of like placing a constraint on yourself and then taking it off, or like how do you think that relates to that experience there? Do you think you were putting constraints on yourself by trying to develop a technique?
I was, yes, I was. And then in that case, though, it did help me realize that the constraint was like, okay, it's really not about the technique. And even if I come up with this new technique, then that's not what I want to do. I'm not explaining this very well, am I?
No, I think you're fine. I think
yeah,
that
for
there's
me-
time. So I think about like, the Hollywood Code, for instance, and like how there were all these things that they were not allowed to show on film, right? There are all these constraints they had. But what happened was like all this symbolic imagery, they got fireworks to display instead of
A train going through a tunnel.
exactly like all of these little like kind of visual references that became artistic expression because of the rules that they had to follow. But then there's other times where I think when you're like placing artificial constraints upon yourself, it can be like a detriment. How do you know the difference? How do you know when to know the difference, I guess?
I think when you realize that it's not working out like you want it to, which would be what happened with where I was trying to develop the motion blur technique. But yeah, I've been happy with the constraints that I've added for myself because when I started doing these still lifes, and I mentioned this in the video, but I'm assuming that the viewers haven't necessarily.
They'll probably watch it after this if they haven't yet.
But yeah, like I started doing still lifes of assembled objects, and I had even bought a couple of like a miniature horse, like a model, not an actual horse. I mean, like a
Not
model.
little Sebastian.
Yeah, not little Sebastian, but like a little horse sculpture, and then I had an okapi that's like an unusual animal, and I was going to put those into still lifes, and then right away when I did them, I decided no, I would rather just use natural or organic objects. And in the beginning, I would even go to the grocery store and I would get like a juicy strawberry and pair it with a seashell that I found, or like a flower or something that I bought at the store. And so that was one constraint that I had, was that it has to be something organic. And I found that, and that helps you hone like what direction you're going to. And then after a few years into that, I decided that it was only going to be like foraged natural objects, so nothing I could buy at a store.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that I have to find it myself, because like I said, I do have the cat skull that my mom found, and I have a really cool fossil shell that Chris found one time we were at the beach. But it's stuff that you would find in the woods or the swamp or wherever, as opposed to buying them in the store. And to me, that has been really freeing, because then it's a matter of what I can do with the materials that I find, and trying to work within my own language, really, of using these. So it's been very helpful to keep me in direction, because I especially think with people who are naturally very creative, is that they want to go in all different directions at one time.
Yeah.
If you can come up with some constraints that you enjoy and that you think gets to the heart of the matter, then that's good. If you find that they're too limiting and you're not having any fun with it, or you're not being inspired, then that would probably be the sign to change it. But I think I also used the example of in an acting class that I took, where we had to write a scene at the beginning of class, and the teacher would give us it's got to be about a family conflict, and then here's this line you've got to put in there.
Yeah.
That was way easier than the time that he came in and was like, yeah, just write whatever you want. We're like, oh, what are we supposed to write now? I don't know.
Yeah, or like, tell me about your summer, or
Yeah.
So it sounds like when you stopped putting those kind of artificial technical constraints on your work is when you started to really work on this book. that. And I'm going to go ahead
Yes.
and hold up. And this book just came out. It's called Artistic Alchemy. And I just got my copy today, so I'm really excited for it. But all of the kind of constraints that you've been talking about are the constraints that you put on yourself when developing this book.
Yes, although you can see the earlier paintings, they still have like flowers and fruit and stuff that I would have bought at the store.
Is it okay to show a couple of things?
Sure.
So this may be something.
So this would be an example of, can anybody want to say that?
If not, I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a golden barrel cactus that I purchased at a store, and then a lily, which, by the way, is very toxic to humans and a lot of animals like cats. So I'm glad I'm not using anything like that anymore, bringing it into my house, because I have cats.
Yeah, I have cats too.
So don't have lilies around them.
So is it in chronological order then?
Yes.
That's really
Pretty much.
Really
I might
interesting.
have, with the earlier paintings, might not be in exact order, but I mean, at least it goes from starting from the earlier years to the later years.
And how many years does this of work does this culminate in?
It goes up to 2025 because I just made it in 2025. Well, let me see. What was I don't remember what's the first. It'll have the copyright date. Is
Oh.
that the first? Is that the first one? What does
I don't
it
know.
say? 2015. I was thinking 2013. Okay, there you go. So 2013, I think, is the earliest.
Gotcha. So 12 years of painting.
Yeah.
And is it all painting or?
Yes, it's all
All
painted,
painting,
yes.
okay.
And it's all oil on canvas, and I don't paint the background. I just leave it with the white background of the unpainted canvas.
I feel like that is maybe like a throwback to medical illustrations and
Well, it
or maybe
kind of
inspired by
is.
that.
It is, because if I painted a shadow, like a cast shadow, like I could really make these items in the still life just pop like they're jumping, like they're floating over the page or sitting right there on the page with a cast shadow. That is something that you do basically avoid in scientific illustration and medical illustration. You usually would leave the shadows out. But when I was a senior in college, like my very last quarter here, I took a watercolor class, and one of the things that we had to do was paint a mossy log like a stick. As you can imagine, since I love moss, like that was super awesome. I just found one at my parents' house, and we had to paint it realistically, and of course I did a great job on that one. And then after I was done, the teacher was like, "Oh, you can put in a cast shadow," and I was like, "Nope." Partially because I was afraid I was going to ruin it,
Right.
but
Yeah,
I was
mean,
like, you know what, it doesn't really need a shadow. It still looks three-dimensional without it.
but that kind of became part of your voice then.
It did, it absolutely did. And some of that is for time. 'Cause
Yeah.
I could take the time to like paint. When I first started doing these still lifes, I would do them in one day, and it was just an alla prima all at once. And I would have a fabric background, and so that would take extra, and then paint the shadow. And then at some point I was like, these backgrounds aren't adding anything.
Yeah.
It'd be so much faster if I just didn't paint them at all.
And this is available to order
On Amazon.
And I've got a link to it in the description of this episode.
Yes.
So make sure that you check it out. One other thing I wanted to ask you about, a theme that commonly comes up on this podcast is I've interviewed people that create music just because they love music, and I've interviewed musicians and artists that create because it helps them process things, and it helps them, and like bad things can happen if they don't express themselves in the healthy ways, or handling trauma or things like that. And I was wondering how much of it for you, it sounds like you had an innate love of art your whole life, but I also am curious, like how much of it is like a transformative, like processing or even healing thing for you.
A lot of it is, and that's where I use the term alchemy, artistic alchemy, because I am taking usually two different objects that wouldn't necessarily be put together, two different natural objects, and assembling them into something. But a lot of it is for dealing with trauma, not just for myself, but for other people, and trying to make something positive. I think I have one in the book. There was a piece that I did about female genital mutilation, which is not something that's generally not really done around here. It's not something I have personally experienced. As far as I know, I don't even know anybody who's personally experienced it, but I still thought I should do something about the topic, and hopefully if anybody who had survived that saw the artwork would find it uplifting. And it's to send a message about this is something that should not be happening.
Yeah.
But hopefully, with stuff that maybe not as extreme as the female genital mutilation, but other things, I've had people who have survived trauma tell me that they feel seen, and that it helps them feel better about the experience. For me, the main paintings like that would be the Welling Up series, which have to do with having loved ones who are in terrible health. And then also I think I've got 2 in here that are called Uncaptive, so it's like a very small series. But when I was 4 years old, I escaped a kidnapping attempt.
Oh.
And honestly, I never really felt safe since then. But
I can imagine.
But yeah, so I did a couple of pieces having to deal with that, or talking about that. Although I don't know that many people that have escaped kidnapping attempts. There's like a Gen X meme about that says something like, "Oh, you talk to any Gen X person, and they tell you about a day that starts with them making breakfast and then escaping a kidnapping attempt or something." So like,
Is it like making fun of like stranger danger or something? Or
yeah.
Is that a story you're willing to?
We didn't really have stranger danger. I was just, my parents informed me that there are people who want to take children off the street, and some of them do it because they can't have a baby and they want a child, and then some of them do it because they want to murder a child. They didn't talk about other stuff in between, but anyway.
Right.
So basically, when the man tried to order me into his car, and was screaming at me to get into his car, I did not get in, I ran. And luckily, my husband Chris actually found out years later, based on things that I had said, like, it never occurred to me that maybe we could figure out who it was. And basically, yes, we figured out who it was. We figured out who it was from the timing and from the description, and he actually took it upon himself, because I'd been telling him the story ever since we knew each other. And then after I went to bed, he was like looking stuff up and pinned it down to 2 people, and that were rather notorious in South Carolina. And I'm afraid to say who the person was, because I know that there's still like a lot of living relatives. The person was executed by the state of South Carolina, but
Gotcha.
But I remember, when my husband was like, "Okay, was it Larry Gene Bell?" And I was like, "No," because I remember what he looked like. No, that was not the person. And then he was like, "Well, it's probably." And then I was like,
"It sounds like it's public information, but
not related to me."
Right?
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
But yeah, the person was executed, not because of me, but yeah. But he
did those paintings help you feel safer?
A little bit, yes. It was nice to address it, and it gave me a reason to talk about it, because it is weird to bring up, "Hey, this man who was going to very violently murder me, like, tried to get me into his car." And luckily he wasn't trying very hard to get me, because I'm sure he could have jumped out of the car and run. Because I was playing in the street by myself. This was before we lived in the woods. And I was just 2 houses down from my own house, and by myself, and that's all it takes. And no security cameras back then, so that would have been it. But
yeah.
So anyway, but yeah, he was apparently, somebody turned the guy in. Now that we know who it was, like a month or 2 after that happened, and what's interesting is that he had a car that fit the description of the car that he had been in.
He had been killing
kids, adults. It's weird, because like usually people like that, they have a type.
But he didn't.
It was like men, women, children, old people,
That's crazy.
his own nieces. So yeah.
Wow. Holy shit.
I know.
I'm glad you knew to run.
I was unarmed, but my parents at least told me that, to not get in the car with somebody.
Yeah.
But yeah, I actually was thinking about doing a series about this. I'm worried that it would sound somewhat like victim blaming, because it's not, but I think it's like the way that girls and women are raised in this country, and not just this country, but most parts of the world actually, where we're supposed to be nice and polite.
Right.
But the series would be called Good Girls Gone Missing. And I remember years ago, there was some like 9 or 10-year-old who they believed she had been kidnapped. And I don't know whatever happened to her, but her classmates were saying like what a nice girl she was and what a sweet girl she was.
Yeah.
And I remember at this time, and I was already an adult, of course, and thinking like, nobody would have described me as being a nice, sweet person when I was 4 years old. And then I thought, but I was also like not so nice that I got in the car with somebody just because he was telling me to get in the car. And like I said, I'm worried that would sound like victim blaming, because I don't know what the circumstance was
I think what
of this particular child. But I just think that
I think if you zoom out, instead of making about any one specific, but if you zoom out and think about how like that learned behavior
it puts women at risk.
Women and kids of all kinds, I think,
yes.
too. But women,
specifically with women, where you're not supposed to like say no, and especially to a male.
No,
like they teach them
be
to
polite,
not, be polite to a man, and it's like that man, don't.
yeah. I think that like when you talk about the societal norm that needs to be addressed, that's not victim blaming at all. That's legitimate.
So it's just,
for sure.
but I do think that is putting children at risk of.
Well, and I think then the
into a
reaction
really
to
bad
that is
situation.
things like stranger danger, which isn't necessarily the healthiest way to handle that either. Because then
what if it's a person that's related? I think the thing that they say about nowadays is like tricky people. So it's not necessarily a stranger, and a lot of times it is.
But how are you supposed to
often
make
than
friends
not.
if you don't talk to strangers?
You would hope that if you're like 8 years old, that another 8-year-old is hopefully not going to have the power to do anything like that with you. But yeah. So.
What kind of led to the decision to put all of this into a book? Was that always the plan, or was it something that you had came after you started doing the paintings?
Oh, after I started doing the paintings, I had the idea in the back of my mind for a while. It did seem like the past year or two, everybody I know has had a book come out. My husband he did one that's 599 pages, and that's because on the Amazon Direct Publish, 600 is the limit for a paperback.
Uh-huh.
But basically, no, I did this back in November so I had a cardiac ablation, and I was like basically just lying in bed for a week, and I couldn't really do anything. But then Christmas was coming up, and I was wanting to have a book of my art made for my mom as a Christmas gift. And I was thinking, like, I had done one before, like, years ago using Shutterfly, so I was thinking, like, Shutterfly or Nation's Photo Lab. And then Chris was like, why don't you just do one on Amazon? And then I was like, this is brilliant, because I had been trying to think of ways to sell my art where I don't have to ship it.
Yeah.
Like digital downloads and stuff, and he was like, and then you can have it on Amazon. Of course, like a dummy, I have it on my website also, where I would have to ship it out if people want a signed copy. But if you don't want a signed copy, it's just on Amazon, and you can buy it, and I don't have to package it up or anything, because I don't enjoy that part of it. But yeah, so basically then I was having to just lie around, and I thought I had it put together in a day and a half, which was basically like just gathering where I was starting with the more recent artwork and just gathering it, and where I had written statements about them. And then I realized that for a hardcover book, which is what Chris said, you gotta do a hardcover book, it needed a minimum number of pages, the opposite of his problem with his 599 page book. So then I had to like scramble and, okay, I've got to dig up like the older artwork and put that into. And then there were a few places where I hadn't written a statement about the artwork. So then I had to think real carefully and come up with something quickly. And so I put it together very quickly, and there it is. And
So you
Sorry.
painted for 12 years and then you put it together, right?
Yeah. Because I was, I worked on a Saturday and then Sunday morning I'm like, okay, by noon I'm going to be done with this and I'm going to upload it. And then I tried to upload it and they're like, you need to add like a bunch more pages to it. And I was like, crap.
What size canvas do you typically paint on?
The biggest I've done, not counting the signboard that I did in acrylics that was for outdoor display in Watkinsville, 5 by 4 foot. That doesn't sound that big. That is actually huge.
Yeah,
that's the biggest one I've done. That does not fit in my car. That does not fit in most cars because of the wheel. And to display it in some shows, I had to basically rent a van for it.
Goodness.
So I'm not doing that anymore. But so most of my paintings I was doing 22 by 28, which made it easy to do, and which this wasn't how I planned it that way. I just thought that was like a good size. But then you could do an 11 by 14 print of it, and it reduced down without having to
alter
to a standard size, without having to like crop anything or worry about that. But right now, the series I'm doing, Feral Feminism, I'm doing 11 by 14 paintings, partially because I'm running out of room in my house, but also to get it done more quickly because the project I'm doing this year that I expect to take most of the year is going to be a field guide, a nature guide, but feral feminism field guide, and it's going to have my paintings about feral feminism, which are going to be animal bones. So far it's skulls combined with feathers, and these are of course all ethically sourced, meaning they're just on the ground. I'm not killing any animals to get them there. The animal's already dead, and there's this nice skull. I will gather that up and use it. But then what's a little bit different about this project, and I'm planning for it to be a digital download and maybe even a book, like on Amazon, but I'm going to also have sketches in there, like a nature journal. If you've ever seen like a nature sketchbook or a nature art journal of different things relating to the paintings, and then some text to go with it, which is where I'm a little bit more out of my element. And then I'm going to do a series of videos about making the project, and this is going to be a little bit different from my creativity tips because those are all standalone and don't have to relate to one another. And I'm trying to figure out how to do like a series of videos about this project and having it more of telling a story about it.
Yeah.
Obviously it'll relate because it's okay, here's this painting I'm working on now, but.
So can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration for your Creativity Tips YouTube channel and kind of what that's about and what you're doing with it?
A couple of different things. I had seen something, so this would have been late in 2024, that I was thinking about doing a channel of these tips. I saw something that was basically asking, what are you an expert on? And the only thing I could think of was creativity. And I'm surprised, I've done 61 videos now. They're not all live yet. I have them, it's a struggle, like trying to keep up. So like I'll do 3 on a Saturday and it takes forever to upload. And I don't even edit them. I don't even edit them. Except to cut off the beginning and end where I'm like starting the camera.
Right. Did that millennial pause.
Probably wouldn't have to do that if I had gotten a camera with a remote. But anyway, but yeah, so what am I an expert on? And the only thing I could think of was creativity. I'm not an expert on painting or art or anything like that. And then I guess the other thing, what was it? Like my sister had retired, and so she's doing like a lot of volunteer work and like on the board of directors at her local animal shelter and trying to make a difference that way. And so I was thinking of that too. And I did a little bit of research on YouTube to look for creativity tips before I got started, and I found almost nothing. And I was like, maybe nobody is interested in creativity tips. But I thought probably the more likely thing is that people just don't know what to say. Because I had to start examining my own process and then like realizing more and more. And occasionally like somebody will give me a suggestion or an idea. But I talk about this in one of my many videos, not as many as yours though, but
I make a lot of clips from the long videos, so it probably looks like there's a lot more than there are.
But yeah, I only remember getting one creativity tip at all in college and med school, which to be fair, I think there was an understanding that like, okay, if you're at this level, you're already creative. And then also like both programs were focused on realism and things like that. But the one tip was know the rules so that you can break them.
Yeah.
And I did do a video about that. But that was literally the only tip I got, except possibly my least favorite tip. I may have heard you've all heard it, think outside the box. Which really is like not a good tip because, so I did a video about that was basically, you're not going to be able to think outside your box. You just have to expand the box.
Yeah.
Because I've seen different things that like different.
That makes a lot more sense.
I have seen different articles that were supposed to be promoting how you need to think outside the box, and they were doing the opposite. And I swear sometimes I'm like, where am I dreaming up these things? But anyway, like years ago, I had read an article promoting the whole think outside the box, and it was supposedly about these scientists like that were studying anatomy, and they couldn't. I think it was about kidney tubules. I don't know. I could find nothing when I went back and tried before I did this tip. So maybe I dreamed this. But pretend this is what happened because it still worked. It was something like this. So these scientists are like, what do these things do? We can't figure out the function. And they had a drawing up on a blackboard or whatever. And an engineer who happened to be in came in and walked into the room, and he's, that looks exactly like whatever engineering thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And the scientists were like, oh my God, that turned out to be its function. Was exactly the engineering thing. So they're like, see, the engineer was thinking outside the box. No, he wasn't. He was thinking within his engineer's box.
Yeah, exactly.
That proves the opposite of what they were trying to say in that article. He was thinking within his engineer's box. It was a totally different box than the scientists had. And they really had no hope of thinking like an engineer unless they had somehow studied that.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was just my advice for that is you're not going to be able to think outside your box. You're not going to know engineering stuff unless you've studied engineering, even if maybe casually. So all you can do is just try to expand that box by learning about whatever interests you and maybe some stuff that doesn't interest you.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
but yeah, so those were like literally, and I don't even know for sure that I heard the think outside the box from a college professor, but maybe I did. I don't know.
It sounds like
everybody
something
hears
they
that.
all said that at some point.
Everybody hears that. But like I said, it really isn't. It really isn't the useful advice. Because basically, it's think of something that nobody else has ever thought of. Just something completely different. We don't know how you're going to do that, but just do it. And it's if I could do that.
Amanda, it's been really great talking to you. Is there anything else you want to mention before we wrap this up? Is there anything that you feel like you left out?
I should mention that as of less than a year ago, so last year, my husband and another artist and I formed the 13 Collective.
Thank you. I was about to say.
Okay. It's like, I need to promote that. And that's spelled THURTINE. So
and there is a link to that in the description as well for everybody listening.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you for that. Yeah. My husband, Chris McKay, and then artist Lindsay Swan and I came up with this idea. Chris and I had actually been talking about doing a collective for a while, and then we met Lindsay she had a solo art opening, and some mutual friends introduced us. And it's exciting because there's like a picture of the three of us together the night we met. And
That's
it turned
really
into
cool.
this really awesome partnership, and we did one show at Cine Lab back in September.
Yeah.
And we have different.
I think that's actually how I first got on your radar.
Okay, good.
Or you got on my radar, rather.
Believe it or not, the theme of the show we've got coming up probably in May is artistic alchemy, and that was not my idea. But
that's really cool.
But we wanted to be about neurodivergence and trauma and healing and things like that. So artistic alchemy is our actual theme, and
What's the date of that?
we have a tentative date set for May 16th.
Okay.
And May 15th, I have a solo show at Tiny Earth Gallery,
Awesome.
which is a really great place to visit, to see a show there, or to have a show there if you're an artist.
That sounds great, yeah.
So that's 2 days in a row. So.
That's really cool. I'll make sure that we get this out like right around then, and then we can use it to
Awesome.
promote both.
Sounds good.
It's been really great talking to you, Amanda.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
I've
much for
enjoyed
being
this.
here.
This is my first podcast, so
Hopefully it won't be your last.
yeah.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my talk with Manda McKay. I thought she's just a really fun person to talk to, but also what a fascinating career. I'm really really want to learn more and more about veterinary art. It's really interesting to me now. Anyway, thanks for listening, y'all. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed that. Make sure to check out her new book, Artistic Alchemy. Make sure to check out her YouTube channel. There's a link in the description. She's doing a feminist field guide right now. She's also doing motivational creative videos. She's working on all kinds of stuff. There's also a link to her book, Artistic Alchemy, in the description. You can get that on Amazon. Thanks so much for tuning in, y'all. I have launched a Patreon just to give you a way to support the show if you'd like. The link for that's in the description. You will get early access and maybe the occasional extra video, but it really is just a way for you to directly support the show. And thanks for listening, y'all. Hit that subscribe button, hit like. We'll see you next week.